Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for attending this session on All In for Change. We're all really pleased to have you with us this afternoon and to have been invited along here today. So I'm just going to share some slides with you. Hopefully you can all see them. And although we cannot see you, we hope that you're out there and that you're listening. And it would be great if you could introduce yourselves in the chat box and let us know where you're from. We have some time at the end for questions, so please ask away in the Q&A box. No questions too silly, so anything about the presentation or about the change team in general, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end, apart from the difficult ones, which we'll ignore. My name's Vicky, and I was in and out of homelessness over a period of 15 years. I now work at Cyrenians, which is a charity supporting the causes and consequences of homelessness, and I'm the service manager there for the private rented sector pilot, which we run in partnership with Crisis, and for the Leap Out of Hours accommodation, which provides support to those on the 12-week residential rehab programme. I'm also a trustee for Crisis UK and St Martin's in the Fields. And last but not least, I'm a proud change lead on the All In for Change team since we began almost 2 years ago. I'm joined today by some of our new change leads, Faith, John Paul and Amanda, who you'll meet shortly. Today, we're going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of the change team, who we are, how we came about, our priorities and the work we're currently doing on our national conversation. We started at the end of 2019, and as you can see, we're all here in person and in real life in this photo. We managed a few in-person meetings, which we call retreats, before moving online at the start of 2020. We're a diverse group of people with lived and frontline experience of homelessness, and some, like myself, have both. We also have Heriot-Watt iSphere representation so that we have an evidence base for our discussions. The programme's led by a partnership of 3 organisations, Homeless Network Scotland, Cyrenians and the Scottish Community Development Centre, but our work is underpinned by the principles of co-production, with the change team helping to steer the agenda, and we're funded by the Scottish Government and St Martin's in the Field. So why has this programme been set up? It's in an effort for united effort and action, so to make people's lives better, more focus and clarity to make people's jobs easier, to build momentum, all in to end homelessness, to communicate a common message and goal, and to break down silos in services, people first with no wrong door. In Scotland, we have great policy and legislation when it comes to housing and homelessness, but we want to build upon this to end homelessness for good. The Scottish Government and COSLA's Ending Homelessness Together Action Plan of 2018 was informed by lived and frontline experience. It set out a transformational programme which needs change on the ground. It recommended 49 actions to end homelessness in Scotland and has since been updated, and some of you may have seen the annual report that was out today. And this included further actions and amendments brought on by the pandemic. But work still needs to be done to ensure these policies and legislations are implemented in practice. One way to do this is by bridging the gap between the people making decisions and those affected by these decisions. This is where the change team come in. We believe that Scotland will only develop and deliver the best policies to end homelessness when people with personal and professional experience are involved. And this slide summarises the reasons. This is just a photo of us near the beginning of 2020 when we had just moved on to online retreats. There were 19 new change leads who joined us this year, which brings us to a total of 37. Our work is guided by our 4 new directions, which are actions from the Ending Homelessness Together action plan, condensed into 4 clear and accessible messages. At a previous session, we asked people to vote on the direction that resonates with them the most. It's a tough call because they overlap so much, but it would be great to hear your thoughts in the chat box, either just now or as we go through the presentation. So the 4 new directions are people first. This is about taking a more person-centered approach to supporting the social, mental, and physical well-being of individuals, giving people more choice and control to build from their own strengths and successes, and focusing efforts on preventing homelessness. No wrong door. It does what it says on the tin, really. It's about a future where people are helped earlier on through stronger coordinated working between different services, with clearer pathways for those most at risk, and no one being turned away and left to navigate the system solo. At home is about everyone having a right to settled, good quality, mainstream housing as quickly as possible by increasing housing options. We know that having a settled base is the best place to enable us to build our lives. And lastly, good vibes. This one is about focusing on people's strengths and abilities, creating positive environments in our services, and helping others to understand and be compassionate about people going through tough times. Eliminating myths and sharing power. Our goal is to test what is happening on the ground in relation to these messages and report back to policymakers. And we use these 4 new directions as a framework for our discussions on the national conversation, which I'll tell you a bit about just now. You'll see on this slide an image of our recent report, and I believe Ginny will be posting a link to this in the chat. Our national conversation. As members of the Change team, we're well connected to people and groups across regions and services, and want to learn from the knowledge and experience of people on the ground who see how decisions made in policy around homelessness look in everyday life, and to share how they think change can happen. The Change team are in a good position to be able to tell decision makers what we see and hear, but we want to ensure that the information we are sharing is up to date, relevant, and representative of people experiencing or working in homelessness. At the end of 2019, when we first began, the plan had been to do a national roadshow and speak to as many people as possible across Scotland. The roadshow idea was obviously postponed, but we wanted to find an alternative, which was our online national conversation. This was launched back in April 2021. We encouraged people to join via our online survey, online workshops, and developed a conversation starter worksheet to assist in having conversations with individuals and small groups in our lives and in our day-to-day work. I believe Ginny is going to put a survey link in the chat as well, so it would be great if you could take some time to fill it out, but obviously after we finish speaking, because you don't want to miss out on that. To date, we've had 184 people join our conversation via 21 online surveys, 6 workshops, which made up 123 participants, and 3 Change team retreats of 40 participants. Participants came from a wide variety of backgrounds: local authority, public sector representation, academia, the private sector, and the voluntary sector, which was the most highly represented. We also had a variety of localities respond, with Edinburgh, Lothians and Borders being the most highly represented, followed by the West. We have had less uptake from the North and Islands and Ayrshire and South Housing Hub areas, so we're particularly keen to hear from participants in the North and in the South, while working with change leads to try and bridge this gap. Experience of homelessness was also varied, with a mixture of frontline workers, those with lived experience, managers, and senior leaders and volunteers. And these are the two questions that we asked. Where is there evidence we have made progress in achieving the 4 new directions, and what is getting in the way of making these happen? Across the board, people were excited to speak to us and to hear from each other. It was difficult to remain on topic and steer the conversation back to the question in hand when people were speaking with such passion and determination to see change. We're excited today to be sharing some of our findings. So on people first, if you recall from the previous slide outlining the directions, people first is about having choice and control and building on personal strengths and successes, focusing on preventing homelessness. So people told us that more organisations are becoming trauma informed, training is being offered more to staff, and they're seeing the approach to daily work improve and offers of support. A growing understanding of the links between homelessness, mental health, addictions and domestic abuse, and the growth of housing first across the country, meaning more housing and support is offered on the principle of choice and control. And finally, improvements in digital engagement and access during the pandemic have allowed services to offer different ways to access support, and at times this meant that more people were reached. So what's getting in the way of making this happen? This is the feedback that we received. There's difficulties in recruitment, so services are short-staffed and limited, which leaves little time to develop relationships with people. Funding difficulties, so it's still too often that funding is limited and short-term, making it difficult again to spend this time building up positive relationships and really understanding what positive change means for people. Limitations on available housing mean that too many people in recovery are still being offered tenancies and blocks in closes where there's identified drug dealing, and this forces people to choose between a home and their recovery. And the dispersed nature of temp and housing in rural Scotland can often mean people moving miles away from their families and support networks, which impacts negatively on their well-being. For No Wrong Door, and if you remember, No Wrong Door was about imagining a future where people are helped earlier and not left on their own to navigate the system. So this is the evidence that people have told us they're seeing in regards to No Wrong Door. So more areas developing prevention pathways with dedicated teams and interventions being established. Better partnership working during the pandemic, meaning more trust being built up. Public health responses during the pandemic have contributed to ensure access to accommodation for all, including those with no recourse. Multi-agency working in the welcome centres in Edinburgh and Glasgow has been important to minimise rough sleeping and offer move-on housing and support. And Housing First teams across the country are helping coordinate support for people who struggle to find lasting solutions in the past. In our conversation, more people thought the gap between what we say we will do and what actually happens to be small, and that it stayed the same in the last year. So what is getting in the way of making No Wrong Door happen? There's limited resources, which leads to high caseloads and high staff turnover, making partnership working a challenge. Frontline staff remain busy and focused on immediate priorities, meaning the window of opportunity to intervene can be missed. Concerns around GDPR are still a barrier, and there's still not enough coordinated working between addictions and mental health services, meaning that there are too many cracks for people to fall through, for example, when leaving prison. At home, so this was about increasing housing options and understanding that prompt settled housing is our right and the best space to build our lives. So the evidence we received for this was the rollout of Housing First, The practice of converting or flipping temporary furnished flats to SSTs, meaning more people have avoided having to move again and feel more settled. More areas creating easier access routes into the PRS where it's affordable and viable, which provides more housing options in local communities. And again, the establishment of the welcome centres in Glasgow and Edinburgh featured and was talked about quite a lot during our conversations. And what's getting in the way of this? New homes not being built quickly enough, a mismatch between available housing and the people who need it, and a lack of temporary accommodation and settled housing in rural areas, again meaning that people are moving away from families and support networks. In our conversation, worryingly, more people thought the gap between what we say we will do and what actually happens to be big in this case. So unlike with the three other directions, and worryingly still, the gap had got bigger in the last year. And last but not least, good vibes. So this is about designing interactions in a way that dispels myths and shares power. Some good evidence that we've seen and heard on this direction was more examples of peer support being available, which helps to build trust and allows people to link directly with others who've navigated the system. Services seriously considering the environment of the buildings they use and how it feels for people coming in. Organisations thinking carefully about the language they use, moving away from words like assessment and having more focus on talking to people and understanding what they want. And more training and regular reflective practice for staff, which creates opportunities to learn about different approaches and think about the person rather than the system. And then what gets in the way of making good vibes happen? Difficulties in recruitment, which lead to staff shortages, making it difficult to prioritise good vibes. Too many messages are still about people, what people need, rather than what they want to achieve. So this is negative and contributes to stigma. And language can still be too complicated, and different language use in different sectors makes communication difficult. In our conversation, more people thought the gap between what we say and what we will do in good vibes is small, and it stayed the same over the last year. You'll be pleased to know that this is my last slide before we move on to discussions with our new change leads. So this, in summary, is our 4 priorities for delivering the 4 new directions on the ground. So building enough affordable homes of the right size and type to make rapid rehousing and housing first work for everyone in all parts of Scotland. Continue to look at how services are funded, making it easy for people to access long-term and flexible support. Build a strong understanding of what contributes to recruitment challenges and work across all sectors to put solutions in place. And learn from the successes during the pandemic and make sure what was achieved is maintained. For example, again, the welcome centres, the reduction in rough sleeping and the increase in housing first. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and hopefully I'm going to be able to invite JP, Faith and Amanda to join me on the stage.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. Lovely, brilliant, thank you. Okay, and I know that you're all recent recruits to the change team and have been thrown into the deep end a little bit today by coming to speak, but it would be great to get your initial thoughts on the 4 new directions and your experience of good changes that you've seen being made to achieve them. So I think we'll pick on JP first, seeing as he was last to arrive.
Me personally, I would say, as far as preventions, regarding prevention, Housing First is when you think about how it was implemented, how short sort of, we're talking just a few years. It was always going to take off slow, but I think that if Mayor was put behind that and Mayor was using that model, because I can, from my own experience, the majority of people that signed up for it in the beginning, it wasn't because they had faith that they're going to get a house. It wasn't that they believed that you would get it in 4 weeks or whatever, but it was for the support. It was for the fact that it was sorry, I forgot the term for that. Self-directed support. It was you could take the support, you could leave it or whatever. So that's why a lot of people signed up. I would say no wrong door. Where do you even start with just say the temp situation, temporary accommodation. It's pretty much just now. It's every wrong door. It's like they will put you anywhere else except actually getting your house, which is why Housing First works as well. But at home, again, I would say Housing First, because they've been, even over the past year, it's been like they've been very supportive, and whatever's been needed, it might not come right away, but at least it's been offered to you, at least you've been asked, and at least it's not like, oh, you've got your house now, get on with it. Good vibes, I would say, just maybe a wee refresher course in training where people have become really jaded and they sort of, it's like, it's a life or death situation, which it is, but the thing is, when you're homeless, you already ken that and you're reminded every day, and what you want is a wee bit light-hearted, maybe self-deprecating humour, just something to take your mind off it. Sorry, I'm aware I'm ranting on anyway, but...
No, that's brilliant, JP. And so do you think you've seen a big change since the start of 2019, really? Do you think you've seen changes happening, or you think there's maybe not as much change as people think from the outside?
The change that I've seen is mainly just in one direction, is that Housing First, as it's been running for so long now, people's faith on the actual street it's almost like it's lesser towards, oh, that'll never work, and more towards, he got a house, how did, and then speaking to the person, oh, I done Housing for, oh, right, how do you sign up? Oh, that's no hanging the now, it's not happening. But what I remember when it first started up was that it was I don't want to say a pilot program, but they wanted to feel for it in certain areas, and can we actually achieve what we're setting it to achieve? Now, they never achieved it in the time frame, but the point is that they achieved it. They achieved getting a lot of people in houses and a lot of people in secure tenancies and stuff like that. And it was their, they could take an easy flat after 4 weeks if that was all they cared about, or they could go down the road to, rehab, all these different things. But it was self-driven, and I would say I agree with Faith, like what she said yesterday, which, the self-driven sort of aspect of things, it'll work for a lot of people, but again, in my experience, when it comes to mental health, you need advocacy there. You need a mental health advocate, because there's certain things where it just you can't cope with all these things, paperwork and everything, and that's coming from somebody who can read and write and all that. But a lot of people in the streets, they're, things have been and gone, and the chance to, I mean, I'm aware there's only one place in Edinburgh that actually teaches reading and writing to people that are, like older and stuff like that. There'd be a lot of stigma going with that, but the trust in the government and the trust in the third sector has rise slightly because of Housing First, simply because it is something that has worked previously, and that's really all that you need on the street is, has somebody actually got a house through this programme or through this charity or through this legal advice or whatever, and then everybody will race towards it. What's needed now is for to realise, well, they implemented it and they said, well, if this works, we'll pump loads of money into this and we'll get it up and running. They just need to stick to their word now and realise that the third sector is the best to deal with this, as opposed to, let's get an outside firm and let's make it all organised. the third sector is the people that are dealing with this every single day. So as far as I'm concerned, they're the only people that have a frame of reference.
That's brilliant, JP.
That's
Thank you.
answered.
I think it's really interesting. You know, you said about people sort of signing up to Housing First because of the support, you know, rather than because of the house. Because often the perception is Housing First is geared up to people that traditionally have not wanted to engage in support, but you're saying you've seen the opposite, really, you know, that people have gravitated towards it because of the support. So I think that's really insightful.
It's not so much that they think it's literally, we have a saying on the street, which is, you know, you've heard the saying, once bitten, twice shy. Well, on the street, it's like 40 times bitten when you're actually going to let it sink in that it doesn't work. And it's not so much, I would say the issue with lack of clientele or lack of fund or whatever is coming for its root. It's not coming for disengagement. It's coming for the fact that people really, I've seen it many, many times before, listened, believed, trusted, had their hope broken, and on the street, hope is your main commodity, and false hope is a kind of, it just brings you down and it messes you up, and so you think, well, I'd rather just not go down that path at all. I've saved the wee heartbreak at the end, but it's mainly because a lot of these things that get sort of this program or this package, they're really just, it's like what I feel, it's like an empathy thing. It's like, you know, we're here for you, we've got you, but it's not actually structured to work in the end. It's just like, we're going to do our best. You know, an example is food banks. You know, many times absolutely no food, but then you're given a box for food that is completely off. All the food is off, and you're expected to go, well, you know what, I've not got any food, so mouldy food is better than no food. But the reality is, what you're left with is a box of mouldy food that you have to get rid of. You know, you have to go somewhere and get rid of it or whatever. And I mean, that's a crap example, but what I'm saying is that a lot of things, if they're put in to be implemented, the long-term thought, will this actually work, or will this create more problems? It's not really taking into account. It's almost like, oh, it's new, it's fresh, so let's go on board. And I just think, you know, the change team in particular, and also got to mention Time for Change with Shelter, because they were kind of one of the first people that done, you know, peer, you know, lived experience kind of thing. But it's things like that, when people in the street can see that it's no coming for an agenda, motivation, or it's just coming for, like, we want to help you and we want to listen to you, because that's the main thing. If you're looking for the main gripe of people in the streets, is that they're just not heard, and that's why I see the change team as something that's is going to, I feel it'll be pioneering with a lot of different things in third sector. So
great, thank you. And Faith, so have you got any initial thoughts then on any or all of the 4 directions, and anything that you've seen happening positively?
What JP was saying about Housing First, that's good for people who've got substance misuse issues, getting into settled accommodation and support. Also, recently Glasgow opened up a place for people who struggle to give up drink and can't go around the houses a bit for lack of treatment. And it's the same place in Edinburgh, a similar place in Edinburgh, but it's been running for a few years. So that's good for things like that, service provision. And I mean, I'm not going to repeat. I agreed with a lot what JP said about the 4 choices, and that is, but which I agree with, is a lot of things are happening and changing, which is good. But I was just reading one in the chat, no offence against Duncan Easton, about people with mental health problems, budgeting and support and things like that. I'm a carer for a person who has mental health problems, and I have an in-law who's autistic. Reality is that people who do have long-term mental health problems may struggle through weekly budgeting, cleaning, money, things like that. The person I care for, I do all the budgeting, I do a lot of the meal planning, things like that. So in reality, things of people with consistent mental health problems would struggle with things like that and would need somebody, either a carer or a good support worker to deal, or somebody who's a good advocate to deal with a lot of what's going on within the home sector, and would find all the form filling, having to go appointments, etc. difficult. So, example, lady, I spoke to a lady this morning. She wasn't homeless. I bumped into her by chance when I was in Boots getting some stuff, and I ended up having to say to her, "Go to welfare rights. This is what you're entitled to." And this is woman who's compos mentis and wasn't aware of her rights, and I said, "This is what you're entitled to," and gave her a few numbers. And she's not homeless, and she's quite presentable, and you wouldn't think there's anything wrong until I listened and I knew what she was on about, and I thought, there's more going on. You need to listen to what people say. Unless you do understand what people say and telling you, you can miss a lot of opportunities. And that people who within the homeless, who work in homeless sections, don't always know and don't always understand what's been said to them. Example is when I was homeless a few years ago, I was saying to the staff, "This hostel's he's paying for me to go up and down the stairs." "Yes, we know, but you're staying there." I'm complaining, and that's me whinging generally. So it's reality. Yes, there's a lot of people trying and working with people who've got substance misuse, mental health problems, but there's not always sometimes lack of understanding of putting things into action.
Yeah, and I think, that came up in the national conversation, Faith, the points you're making about listening to people, and about staff having the time and capacity to be able to take the time to sort of build relationships up with people, because that's how you get to know what people's aspirations are, isn't it? And if they do need any help with things like form filling and any sort of advocacy, but unless you've got the time to spend with the person to see what they might want support with, then you're not going to know, are you?
No, I mean, a lot of the stuff I know, I've learnt the hard way of life and dealt with it, and from that, I say if I'm aware or if I listen to people, I'm the same with neighbours, but I say try this or do this, but I know when during COVID, a lot of people who are homeless went into hotels, but since the hotel stopped, people were back begging on the streets. And there was one woman in Edinburgh, I saw her last year, and I said, "Look, speak to your MSP." Saw her again this year in Edinburgh, same woman, same place in Edinburgh. And I said to her, "What happened?" She said, "Oh, didn't go very far, but I think she had drug use and didn't have anybody to work with her to say, look, do this." I gathered there was a lot of issues there, but because we don't live in Edinburgh, I couldn't say to her, "Look, come here and I'll deal with you." That sounds terrible, but I didn't have basically I wasn't in the neighbourhood all the time, because I don't live in Edinburgh, to say to her, "Come here, you will go and get sorted out." Yeah. So people don't always pick up on why people beg, why people are there. So
yeah. No, that's great. Thank you, Faith. Thank you for that. And Amanda, last but not least, and any initial thoughts on the 4 directions? I'm sure you've got a few, and any positive changes that you're seeing in your work.
To be honest with you, I'm going to touch upon all 4 directions, but maybe not as direct as what JP did. I think one of the major issues is this social housing is not going to resolve homelessness on its own. there's a need to look at innovative ways to find sustainable permanent housing options for people that reduce the length of time that people remain in temporary housing. Last week, I'd met someone who'd been living in a homeless hostel for 2.5 years. This guy works, he's got children, which he's maintained contact to, but he told me that he can't take his children to the hostel. He'd love to be able to have a home where he can do something simple like watch a movie with his kids. He's quite concerned because 2.5 years is a lengthy period in a child's life, and he feels like he's missing out on so much. I believe this man's homelessness could have been ended a lot sooner, and I've got an example of how this could have happened. Crisis and the Cyrenians are in partnership on a pilot project to assist those with support needs into private rented sector. It's proven to be achievable and allows people with vulnerabilities to be able to resettle relatively quickly into accommodation with support in place to meet any needs to prevent repeat homelessness. I know that traditionally the private rented sector hasn't been viewed as somewhere as a viable option, but there is ways to do it, and I think the pilot project's proven it. The benefits, I mean, the human cost alone of lengthy periods of times in B&B or in hostels where your life's sitting in limbo all the time, there has to be a negative impact on people with vulnerabilities because they're somewhere that's got communal living, they've got people with other issues that they're having to experience as well as deal with their own. The one thing about the private rented sector is it allows people to choose where they live, and it solves their homelessness a lot quicker. The big one is the cost savings on temporary accommodation for local authorities, way up 2.5 years in hostel provision versus giving me 700 quid to put a month in advance for somebody on a private let. The progress on the pilot, and this perhaps helps, there's 24 tenancies that have been started in the last year which have ended the homelessness of 26 adults and 7 children. 87% of people that were within these tenancies have multiple support needs. There are 5 letting agents and 1 private landlord that are both engaged in this process. We're averaging at the moment 60 days to do housing, but the quickest has been 12 days. Although it's mostly within Edinburgh City, there are tenancies in Midlothian that have been started through this pilot project. I would like to see things like this rolled out on a much bigger scale. It could end or even avoid homelessness in some situations.
Right, Amanda. Yeah, and I mean that came up in the national conversation as well, about rest and it being underutilized in certain areas. And I know certainly in Edinburgh where we're working, it really is. And I think it's about having that as a legitimate option for people who choose to go into private rental, because it won't be what everybody wants, and yes, there should be more social housing, so there should be social housing available to everybody, but at the moment there isn't. So what do we do just now? I suppose while we're saying there should be more, but what do we do with the people that are in temp? And the numbers of people in temp are going up and up and up, particularly over the pandemic. And so to open up that as an option to people should they want to use it, I think it's a shame really to be ignoring that, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think I've got 3 points in relation to what more needs to be done. One is universal credit, the other is support provision and the shared accommodation rate. In universal credit, one of the major issues faced within this pilot project was universal credit and the difficulties getting rent costs on without any delay and without major mistakes being made by the DWP. And although we've got a resolution now because we've met with the DWP and we've been given a contact at quite a senior level, there's real fears for those that don't work with agencies that are facing this on their own, or agencies who've not got the knowledge or access to these contacts. This could end in failed tenancy, particularly where you're working with someone with support needs that's experienced homelessness, that feels it's too much stress for them to be able to cope. It's having a huge impact on their mental health. I can't not mention the end of the uplift of universal credit for £87 a month this week. with the increases in fuel costs, it's going to plunge our most vulnerable people into further poverty, and they're going to be facing a winter where they're going to have to choose between food and heat. I'd also want to mention, because I'm aware a lot of people aren't aware, that the deduction based on benefits is horrendous. Someone I met last month is going down to £190 per month to live on. Because of how long it takes to get limited capability of work assessment, he is one of the many people with health conditions and disabilities who are going to have this choice between food and heat. They haven't had their assessment yet. This man actually can't afford to live anywhere. That's the most tragic thing. The most that can be taken for your universal credit payments each month is 25% of your standard allowance. However, they can take last resort deductions as well from that, which means it's more than 25%. When your income's only £325 a month, how do you survive with 25% less? I do wonder whether this is something the Scottish Government could assist with. Secondly, the support provision. I mean, I was doing a wee bit sort of poking around this morning. Funding for the Rough Sleepers Initiative in the late 90s. In 2001, one hostel paid their support workers £25,000 a year. That included shift allowances for working unsocial hours. Job adverts today are showing hostel salaries at £19,000 a year. Why are we valuing our workers less now than what we did 20 years ago? Similar to carers, it can be minimum wage for those who are supporting the most vulnerable people. This is not going to attract or retain skilled workers, and we expect a lot from these workers. The issue is down to organisations are pressured into being competitive tenders for contracts to provide the support, so the wages are pushed down. I think you have to consider a lot of the people that are supporting our most vulnerable people are UC claimants themselves. It's higher staff turnover. As wages, you can get paid more for a lot less hassle at Amazon, Lidl or Tesco. Increasing salaries would provide better quality of services. Finally, if you're under the age of 35, you're only eligible for the shared accommodation rate. In Edinburgh, that's £410 a month. To give a wee bit clarity, the rent paid if you're over 35 or you've got an exemption is £688. You're not going to get a private let for £410. We're struggling to get private lets for £688 a month in Edinburgh. It's particularly important when you look at those who are in work on minimum wage claiming universal credit as a top-up. If you consider the levels of young people with repeat homelessness, when their homelessness could have been resolved through the private rented route, if there was a financial means to do this, it has to be that some people have to come through the homeless route because they cannot access funds for the deposit first month in advance, let alone cope with the ongoing housing costs if they've got £200 or £300 to make up on their rent instantly. Again, there could be massive savings on temporary accommodation costs, and it could keep people out of the homeless system. Personally, I think this has to be a priority in the aim to end homelessness. It's about looking at what other housing options are out there.
Thanks, Amanda. And I think everybody knows about the shared accommodation rate, because I know when I came into work in the private rented sector, I was surprised. So somebody aged 34 is only entitled to, you said it was 410
in Edinburgh. Obviously, Edinburgh's one of the higher ones, Edinburgh, Mid Lothian and East Lothian. But, you know, in lights of West Lothian, it's going to be considerably less. How do people survive? How do people solve their own housing crisis when that's what they're up against?
Yeah, and there just seems to be no reason for it, other than I think the assumption is people's sort of parents will support them, but up until the age of 35. And if you're coming from a vulnerable background, or you're coming from a family who don't have money to be able to support perhaps numerous adults in a household that are under 35, then
You also have to consider that those who are on benefits themselves with their children, when their children hit once children come out of full-time education, they're hit with non-deductions. They can't afford to have their children, adult children, live at home.
Yeah. JP, I was going to come to you.
It was just two things, because things that could be done and stuff. Something I want to, two things that I feel quite passionate about. We talk about severe multiple disadvantage. And I think that's taken as a sort of, oh, it started like that, and then how do we deal with it? But I think something that needs to be recognised by the government as well is that every passing week that somebody is on the street, there's going to be added disadvantages. And give somebody a year sleeping rough on the street, and they could have went on the street with absolutely no issues. I guarantee at the end of the year, their head will just be mince. It'll be like the amount of things that they're having to cope with, because it is at some point when you're sleeping rough for long enough, it just kicks in that this is actually about pure survival. It's almost like a war mentality, like we're going to war now. Like, how do you survive? How do you? And then that's when you're not going to reach people, because they will see everything as some sort of trap, and that in itself is just mental health issues. But I think a lot of that could be taken away if it's like their Faith Gainhart experience there. If the government valued, if it put it as a very high value to be a support worker, to be somebody that has got that humanity, and just realise that, look, the amount of, we talked about the temp thing, that they're hemorrhaging money now, and that's what is really puzzling to people in the street. Is it's like, if you've got all these empty places and you're giving all this money to these private people and temp and bed and breakfast and hostel, and like, what is the actual issue if it can be done a lot cheaper, just simply by giving the money towards the people that care, carers, because what have you got there now? You've got carers allowance, which is something like 80, but live on. That's the point. So it's basically giving a message to carers that, well, you can care for your loved ones, or you can go out and get 2 jobs and try your best that way. And it's not fair. It should be the opposite, Like, oh, you designed an app, well, you'll be a millionaire within a year. What about the people that actually are on the ground? They're doing the hardest work possible. They themselves probably need mental health help as well, because of the amount of things they're hearing and seeing, and the humanity that they've got to connect with these people. So give them a proper wage, give them, recognise that they're the people that are actually going to change this for good. Anyway, that's my wee 2 cents.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And when we've been in conversation, that's come up a lot. And I see Davey Pentland's put a question in the Q&A, but I know that he'd probably have something to say. So David's a change lead as well, so he's watching in the audience. But yeah, has been talking for a long while about the disparity of support workers' salaries, and the fact that it's either been stagnant or it's gone down over a period of years, and it doesn't make sense, because it's people that have got a huge amount of responsibility for people's lives, who aren't being properly recognised or compensated financially. And Faith, I'll come on to you. Is there anything you think more could be done to help us achieve the 4 new directions that isn't happening currently?
I mean, talking about support workers in hostels, I used to do agency when I was at university, going on to all the hostels, when I was fitter and able to manage the stairs. And there was sometimes I was at places where the hostel was run on agency staff because of lack of staff, and you get e-rake from the residents and say, "Where's the permanent staff? You can't do a lot. You have to speak to the manager." So I've seen. I haven't worked in about 4 or 5 years, but I was recently contacted by the same agency to see whether I would be able to go back, and I went no because of the stairs, but a lot of the hostels are still running agency staff, and because I've seen it myself, and it's still going just the way this particular agency is still running and looking for more staff recruitment. So that's an issue. And agency staff cost more money as well. Because you're talking about better pay than some of the staff that work there permanently. So I know that is an issue within the homeless sector as well. And when you're agency, you do work with the client group, but you don't actually do what the permanent staff do. So that's a big issue as well. So that needs to be, that's what you said about Vicky, about lack of staff. That needs to be dealt with in recruitment and why people don't stay. And it's better, need better training.
Yeah, and then there's the thing of, you know, I see Maggie said something about keeping the good staff. So there's the thing about retention, isn't there? And then if you've constantly got new staff coming along, they're having to learn the ropes. So it's more training and more money being put into training and into recruitment and inductions and all that sort of thing. Whereas you could just keep the staff that you've got that are good if they were paid an adequate salary, I suppose.
Yeah, and some of the stuff that you worked with at the time, I would wonder, and I kept my mouth shut because there was a lot of the time, but I did wonder sometimes the staff that actually did work there, whether they knew what they were doing or not. Sometimes I would just say, no, this, and explain.
Yeah. Brilliant. And so David's posted a question in the Q&A, and that is about the learning curve, getting to grips with the 4 new directions. So I'll open that out to anybody. How you feel, how easy, I suppose, do you think it's been to identify with them? And do you think that they're the right ones that we should be focusing on?
I mean, yes, because I've been through homelessness. You should be more identified and work with them, but there still needs to be improvement. Because I've done both sides. I've been homeless and worked in the homeless sector, and there is still much to be improved. And whether staff and managers are able to do that is, with finances and a lack of staff, is another situation as well.
Yeah. Brilliant. JP?
I just wanted to say, like, for my, you know, because I've kind of, I'm a wee bit of a nerd when it comes to, like, all facts and the money thing, you know, I try and distill it down and get to the actual issue. But for what I can see, it's just about actual delivery, efficacy, and accountability. You know, if we can get they 3 and under the same system, even if it's just a wee system, and then go, right, would anybody like to join this? I'm thinking something, you know, like a booklet where it's like, this is what we represent. If you're no fully on board on this, then didn't join us, you know, because at the end of the day, the Housing First thing was a consortium. You know, it was seen first and primarily, like I'm talking about at the very start, as conceptual and like, oh, is it possible to work? But it's turned into actually something that's really the only lifeline out there now in Edinburgh, and people wondering, right, well, when's it getting revamped again? When are we getting able to sign up? And it's just like, no, we're only, you know, it's only by reading it, like, oh, we're looking for this amount of people to sign up, and then we'll take our part of it. But the accountability, I definitely believe that the government has to really just stand up and go, well, you know, the buck does end with us. If it's about financing that, I think they see the third sector a lot of the time as, you know, it's almost like a payoff, like, well, they'll take care of it. And how much they need, we can only get half of that. Whereas it should be, you know, like what Dr. Kettle was saying, it should be understood by everybody in the third sector, everybody on the street, everybody in any legal things, advocacy, that this is a duty. It's no law passed in a wee bit. It's literally a duty that says, well, you are a civilised country, you do have a certain amount of funds, you have got your own parliament, you are civilised. So as part of that, why don't we just look at it like a human rights basis and go, well, you might want to provide your people with some homes. Let's start off with that as the accountability. So then go, right, we've got this programme with this thing, right. So now we look at the third sector and efficacy. The beauty of the third sector is it is adaptable, it is flexible, it isn't 100% accountable to say, oh, we made a mistake here. So you utilise that, get creative, find many different directions, funding for many different things instead of this competitive, who gets the big prize. Just put in for tiny wee bits of funding and make it more community based. And then gradually everybody's got to come together anyway, just like we've came here, because everybody cares. The people in the third sector is full of people that actually give a shit about what is going on here. So to get that as a group and to realise our actual strength as the Change team and as Housing Network Scotland, we shouldn't be begging to anybody for money. It should be them that's begging us for the actual expertise and help that we have. So I think that's the first priorities, is to make the government realise, like, you actually need the third sector more than the third sector needs you. You know. Yeah. That's so.
Brilliant.
Really
Thank you.
but
Thanks, JP. And Amanda, how have you found the learning curve then, getting to grips with the 4 new directions?
I think they're quite logical. It's pretty much common sense. It's that's the basis that we should have always been working to. That shouldn't be something that's new.
Yeah. Brilliant. So we've got a few minutes left. So I wonder if we would be able to take a minute and just maybe say why you wanted to join the Change team, if you don't mind. I'll not single anybody out in case anybody's thinking, well, I didn't. Somebody forced me to do it.
Sorry. For me, it's more it's a continuation of something that I've been doing for way back, and that's just trying to, my real passion is stopping child abuse, and it's a weird kind of situation, but the survivor movement in Scotland only really started up because of absolute frustration. It wasn't, we were third sector, but it was kind of like we were seen as the kind of outcast of the third sector. We didn't really do things by the book. It was more about publicity and just getting things out there. Obviously, I'm aware that can happen in certain situations. You couldn't do that with mental health. You couldn't do that with homelessness, because it's more, you've got to get to grips with the actual person and build the trust. But how I got involved with the Change team was literally Housing Network Scotland were really helpful in getting me my place with Housing First, because just, like breaches and stuff like that, and it was Shelter and Homeless Network Scotland that gave me the information to go, look, this isn't like that, it's a duty, this is how you get, this is the steps you go through. And then for there, me personally kenning that the majority of people that are abused as kids end up on the street, I just thought this makes a logical move, because right now there's no really a survivor movement in Scotland. It was cut off right at the very beginning, no funding, and the people, it was just me and another few people that were doing it just completely off their own backs, and it's not possible now. But like I say, the way I see it is people are on the streets, so now, I know a high majority of them will have suffered for childhood abuse, and so it's just like, well, this is the next best thing that I can do, to try and help them in that sense. So that's why I joined.
Brilliant.
I mean, I just joined just to see whether I can make a difference, because I've experienced homelessness, and realities, people in government make these rules, don't understand what reality of it all. So just to try and use my own experience to help.
Lovely. And Amanda?
I think, Change team, I'm going to be able to be part of something that's got real ambition and a platform to contribute to the change. I've not been on the team long, but I'm absolutely amazed by the passion and the determination from everybody on the team. It's inspiring.
Thank you. And thank you all for being so open and honest and frank. And that was a great session. So thank you. And thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks, Vicky, for making it all go smooth, especially
Thank you, Vicky.
the format.